every religious institution, this is true of other traditions that I have come in touch with too, has many different layers, and there is a deep inner spiritual tradition to the Christian tradition that's expressed in the church, and is for me expressed in my particular church and for other people in their particular churches. But then there is also associated with the church institutional aspects, and I may or may not agree with those externals, or in certain cases I may, but in other cases I may not. And it is of course very typical for an institution that they want to they have always a tendency to put down your personal experience, and you better do what is taught here. You follow the doctrine and so forth. And if you are a member of a church, you should expect that, but it is also true that in the Christian tradition you're always encouraged to follow, regardless whatever else is said, to follow your conscience. You have a responsibility to form your conscience. That means you are not, you didn't invent the wheel. You have to look at the maps that other explorers of the spiritual realm, of the God realm, have drawn up. But ultimately, your experience and your exploration is more important than all the maps in the world. And that is also the teaching, although in practice you're absolutely right. When I came to the monasteries 40 years ago, and I would have said at that time I had some what you might call mystical experience, and that's why I want to devote my life to the search for God, they would have said, oh, here comes one of those kooks, and I would never have gotten into any monastery at all. At that time you couldn't talk about this sort of thing. Now we are much more open, and nowadays people talk quite freely about this. Spirituality.
Well, of course, the church is an ancient institution, and it's gone through many cycles. One of the most frequently referred to struggles that the church has had, as I understand it, has been the struggle against Gnosticism, to identify Gnosticism as a heresy, which, and I thought what that was saying is that it's a statement of hubris to try and know God through your own inner experience.
Yes. Now, there's an important point here. We have discovered today the positive aspects of Gnosticism. Up to well, the 40s, we didn't know Gnosticism really by its own testimony, but mostly by its adversaries and those little quotations from Gnostics that we had in the early church fathers. Then we found this whole Gnostic library at Nag Hammadi, and now we have many, many Gnostic books, and we can look what the Gnostics did on their own. But one has to make, and there were many good things, and the Christian tradition was impoverished by eliminating them, but there were also many things that we would not want to identify with today. For instance, the Gnostics had a very poor notion of the body. The body was really bad, and only the mind was good, and that's something that we wouldn't want to identify with today. That's just one of the elements that people don't stress so much. But also when it comes to knowing what the church really, or the church, but I should rather say what the healthy tradition really stood against, was that the Gnostics thought that knowing alone was saving you and was putting you on the right track. And what all the great saints and spiritual masters say is that knowing is a great help, but then you have to put that knowledge into practice. It's not just the knowing, it's the doing. So it was not a matter of rejecting the knowing, it was rather rejecting a knowing that separated from the doing. One has to be fair there. I'm also very much in favor of many of the ideas that the Gnostics introduced, and we should avail ourselves of what is there for us today. But we have to be careful. There were also some things that we would not like to add.
Well, I think I'd be putting you in a very unfair position to ask you to defend every practice that the Church has engaged in historically. Obviously, you're here speaking from a new point of view, and one that's to a large degree your own. You're speaking your conscience, I think.
Yes, and I think that this is really how you can distinguish a great tradition within Buddhist, Hindu, Sufi, Christian, from what we call a cult. A cult for us has simply become a very negative term. And I have struggled for years to say, well, what really makes a cult a cult? And I have come to an answer that for me personally at least is very satisfying and helps me sort things out. And that is that a cult puts people down. You see, if you are told what is right and wrong, and you are not encouraged to make up your own mind, then we are not dealing with a healthy tradition, but with a cult. And if and one thing about all the great traditions, as I said, Buddhist, Hindu, Christian, that is noticeable throughout history is that when they were healthy, they built people up. They helped people eventually stand on their own feet and make their own decisions and come to their own conclusions. But this distinction between cult and tradition, authentic tradition, allows you to say that every authentic tradition runs the risk of any moment becoming a cult. And in the course of history, something that's 2,000 years old was not infrequently putting people down and making them shut up and just follow the guidelines and follow the rules and do what you're told and don't think about it too much and so forth. Well, that's not the healthy core of the tradition. So I am committed to the healthy core of the Christian tradition that makes you eventually stand on your own 2 feet. And the other one we just have to reject.
Mm-hmm.